And welcome everyone to our talk on the role of service design in digital transformation. I'm Minette. My name is Minette Mangahas. That's my full name. And I am a lead experience designer at Thoughtworks Germany, based in Berlin.
All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Poorva. Nice to have you here. For accessibility reason, I'm an Asian Indian. I have short black hair. I'm wearing a black shirt. I also work as a lead experience designer, service designer at Thoughtworks, based in India, Mumbai.
Yes, and I think that there's a lag in our deck. Oh, great. Thanks, Purva. And let me also describe myself for you, those of you who can't hear me and see me. I have curly black hair and I have white glasses. I'm wearing a white t-shirt and a brown jacket. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. So let's see, what do we have for you today? We're going to start this session by introducing some very base concepts around service design and digital transformation in the first part of the talk. Moving on, in the second section, we will be sharing a framework that has worked for me and Minette using a case study, which is a real life project that we've been working on. And to end this, we will have outcome, conclusion, and question answers. So let's dive straight in. Services are all around us. Every day, all of us consume so many services. You just name it: ordering food, going to a gym, planning a vacation, or even buying a car. There not been a single thing that is not a service anymore. But for today's discussion, let me take a very simple example of a coffee shop. We all have experienced this as users. Let's wear a user hat and remember, when we go to any cafe as a user, there are so many things we see and we interact. We talk to barista, we look at the menu, we pay the bill, we also enjoy your coffee, or we take it away and have it on the go. These are all of the part of the service that are visible to us. We interact with them actively, and they comprise of the user experience aspect of any service. But is this enough? Is that it? Definitely not. We as the users do not see many other things, and let's see what are they. We as users do not see the technology and product teams that enable these beautiful contactless payments for us. We do not see the planning, the design teams, operations, logistics, supply chain, and all of the processes that take place within a business or the organization behind the scene. To establish some terminologies in a service design language, things that you see that are above these dotted line that you interact with as a user are called front stage. And things that happen or activities that happen behind this dotted line and you don't probably see or interact with are called backstage. All of these and how they work with each other define the user experience or the customer experience of any service. How can I have this talk without really including this fantastic quote by Mark? And how can I explain service design any better? Let me read it for you. When you have two coffee shops right next to each other, selling the exact same coffee at the exact same price, service design is what makes you walk into one coffee shop and not the other, come back often, and also tell your friends about it. Doesn't he nail it in the head? I don't need any explanation. This tells us why we need service design, absolutely. But now let's shift gears a little bit. We have been seeing services from user point of view. Let's wear a hat of a creator. Things get complex and interesting at the same time when you are not the user, but you need to create these service experiences. We are now responsible for designing and defining what the front stage would look like, what our users would know of as our service. Services are nothing but these micro interactions that happen between the user and a company, at a very fundamental level. These interactions are nothing but touch points, and these touch points are important because they are the evidences that tell us service is taking place, because it's not a thing. What is a service? It's not a product. It's not a physical object that tells us that, oh, this is it. It's hard to define a service. So these touch points really help us define and really evidence it. Now, for us as creator to be able to design and influence these interactions very effectively, we can actually define if they align or misalign. It's important to understand the anatomy of any service really well. How these parts that are visible, we saw in the coffee shop example, and parts that are invisible are related or not related. This will also help us because if we know all of this anatomy well, it will help us to know the impact of certain design and business decisions on the overall experience of the service. And we can have better control on the user experience of the service by doing so. Let me double click on this concept a little bit more. When you look at the services, they're not really linear alone. These experiences are circular in nature. And that's why when Mark says in a coffee shop example, we want our customers to come back or also to refer to their friends. So we want it to get extended and not just exit. Now, when we are trying to do this, it's important, and I'm saying this again and again, because I think it's very important to establish the fact that there are elements, actors, entities, whatever you want to call them, that are visible to you, employees, partners of the company. And then there are other people who are not at all visible to you, but they exist and they are extremely important to deliver the experience that we intended to. If we move further, and I think it's valuable for us to know, because for some of you, this question might be popping in your head as to, okay, but what about other design disciplines? So it's important to know how they relate to each other, what is their association with each other. But most importantly, user research is the single source of truth that feeds into all of them. They all need to work in tandem with each other to be able to deliver the touch points and the overall service we spoke about. Before I move to the next section, I really want to call out one thing, that our job as service designer is to be able to understand this complexity, navigate it really well, and most importantly, to be a torch bearer for the user in the program, because it's very easy to for everyone in the program to lose sight of the user.
Okay, so now let's look at digital transformation. And let's look at it in particular from the perspective of a project designer. I think we lost the deck, Poorva. Okay, great. Well, Poorva's putting that up again. So what do we mean when we talk about digital transformation? In this case, what we're actually talking about when we talk about digital transformation is a project that a company undertakes when it decides at a moment in time that it wants to transform the tools and the systems that it's using to take advantage of new methods in software development and methodology. So, for example, in a lot of cases, some companies may have tools that they have taken on from a third party that they've purchased at some point in time in the past. Could be 5 years, 10 years, maybe even more. And then they've learned about how they like to work, and this way of working has evolved. And those tools are no longer really fully satisfying their needs. So they need to actually build their own tools. So they might undertake a digital transformation process in doing so. They may also find that the way they were structured in the past is no longer serving them well. And actually that they want to take advantage of things such as advances in cloud computing or artificial intelligence in order to make their systems and their tools smarter. So then they would then go through a digital transformation process or a program in order to transform the way that they work, transform the experience of their customers, and in some cases, when they're changing the tools that they're using internally, transform the experience of their colleagues and their teams within the company. So for this talk, we're not going to go over everything about digital transformation because it's quite a huge field, but we're going to look at it through the lens of product design. So let's first of all look at, okay, what is the value of digital transformation to companies from the perspective of product design? So we've already talked a little bit about, how it can remove redundancies and increase efficiency. It improves time to market and sales. It decreases risks and errors. It can increase automation and decrease manual labor. It enables the company to anticipate user needs and make space for new products, and also overall creates a seamless user experience. So this is really the point of what we're going to look at today. So how is it that we're using service design in order to really supercharge your digital transformation program? So I'm going to actually just go through a little bit more deeply into a couple of points. So just to illustrate some of the experiences that we've had as well. So for example, in looking at various programs, oftentimes the experience of, let's say, a user base that you have that is internal could be that there's a lot of paperwork involved. In some systems, there's still quite a lot of spreadsheets and multiple spreadsheets open at the same time, a lot of manual labor. So what we're wanting to do is then create a new ecosystem that solves all these different needs and brings them together and makes them smarter. And the next slide, we're going to look at then now here a couple of the common pitfalls that that teams and companies have a tendency to fall into. And I'm not going to go through all of them in detail because we're also going to present a case study where we're actually going to talk through some examples and some learnings that we have. But I'm going to summarize them for you here so that they're all in one place as a kind of high-level overview at the moment. So what are things to watch out for? First, we want to make sure that when we're entering into a digital transformation project, that we are mindful that the people that we're working with are going to need to be prepared to shift their mindset, to shift the structure of how they've had their workflow for a long time, perhaps, and their ways of working. So we want to make sure that that they're prepared for making that change and they understand the reasons why they're making that change. Otherwise, that can create problems in and of itself. Two, we want to avoid something called that I call reskinning the goat. So oftentimes people understand design in terms of what you see. So this would be sort of like the coat on the goat, what color it is, what does it look and feel like? But actually, it's a lot more than that. So one of the pitfalls is the idea that you can keep the same goat and just change its color. And so, which in this case of software development would be UI design. So you want to look at not just how it looks and feel, but also at its underlying structure. So what is actually the logic? What's the journey that the users take? Can we make it smarter? Can we make it better? Third, we want to also stay away from thinking purely in terms of technological solutions. So oftentimes we get really excited about new technologies. We think, this thing called artificial intelligence is going to solve everything. That's not always the case. We also need to be smart about how we apply technologies. And we need to make sure that when we have problems that are social in nature, that have to do with communication systems, that we don't just always rely on technological solutions, that we actually look at the whole picture. And we bring together the opportunities of technology with smarter ways of doing things. Fourth would be inadequate design governance, and we'll go into what this means a little bit later. And then 5 would be rushing in with our research. As Poorva pointed out earlier, research is really the foundation for everything that we do. It makes design and all the products much better. And also, it makes all the decisions that we make really informed decisions. And then 6, teams can be busy in focusing on the parts, mostly focusing on what's directly in front of them, what's on their table, and may lack the understanding of the whole. So especially in very large digital transformation projects, there is a tendency for teams to kind of, become really intensely focused in their own silo. And we want to make sure that we keep communication open and we have a clear vision of the roadmap forward for everyone. So could I have the next slide, please, Poorva? Great. So one thing that I'd just like to highlight here is the tendency to go into or to follow what we call in software development Conway's Law. So in Conway's Law, Melvin Conway said that there is a tendency for organizations to design their systems in a way that mirrors their communication structure. So if we can see on the left, you have a kind of like pyramid hierarchy. What will be a tendency is that people will redesign that same pyramid and maybe just change the external, color of it. And so we want to make sure that we resist this tendency by being really user-centric, and so that we organize our teams and we organize the ways in which we work, the projects that we're doing based on what users need. Also, the other thing is on the left, you can see that the reason why this tends to happen is that in the beginning, we think that users are quite remote. We are the users and we'll just do what we like. This is also a pitfall, and we have to be very careful. I think that can be part of the process, and that's not to be completely discounted. But at the same time, we really have to talk to users directly. So let's have the next slide, please. So in summary, service design really has the capacity to bring together the interests of business and business goals and the opportunities of technology. And we do that by really keeping in mind, okay, what is best for the users. And when we bring in service design to do all of these methods that we'll talk about in the case study coming up, you'll see how that then results in a successful transformation.
Well, thank you. So now we move on to our second part, like I mentioned in the beginning, is where we will be sharing with you a framework that has worked for us, rather working for us still, using a real project case study of a transformation. And I think I'm facing a bit of a challenge in terms of, I don't know, it's a little lag, I guess, but I hope that should be okay. So there you go. What you see on the screen are these 6 strategies that we feel have worked for us and would work for any transformation project. They're not they're logical order in the context of this presentation, but they're not really sequential in nature. Depending on when you start in a project, what's the maturity level of the program, people, stakeholder, the timeline, you can decide to go left, right, up or down. But what's important is these will help you to not fall into the pitfall that Minette spoke about. I'm just going to read them and then we will go in each one of them in detail with some examples. First one is remove your blinders, get the big picture through research, facilitate cross-functional collaboration across teams, which will help in resolving problems and proposing solutions, apply systems thinking and consider adjacent platforms, establish a good design governance, and use user-centric methods and metrics to measure the entire progress. Let's now understand what is the case study about, and there comes our transformers. As you will all know, this was a project where a large global auto company in Europe decided to embark upon a path of sales and operations transformation. And we were part of this project. So some of these things are really very close to our heart, and we can say with conviction that they worked for us and would work for all. To give you a little bit more context and the background of the program was complex. It was large and complex. As you can see, the mission was twofold. There was a transformation of the sales process on the business side and the software ecosystem on the IT side. And like Minette said, service design is best positioned to connect the two, is rightly so. There were over 160 processes that were defined and multi-vendor, multi-product teams that need to really work through together. And you can imagine with the complexity of this nature, it is but natural to fall into fragments and silos and lose sight of the whole. And that's the exact reason why service design was set up by the client. And our role or the job in the whole program was really to ensure that we bring this, be the torchbearer of a user and not lose sight of this. We were presented with few challenges, and I'm going to go over them very quickly. First and foremost, where is the user? Who are we designing this for? What will they be doing? What are their tasks and jobs to be done throughout the program? We did have business processes, but what's the linkage between the business processes and the journeys our users will take through the ecosystem? at a very holistic level, what is this feeling, or what does this feel like when we transform the service? What's the experience overall, not of the product, but the overall service experience? And if I go back to the transformer project example, imagine when a truck becomes a robo, what are some of the hinges and connectors that we have to design so that when truck becomes a robo or robo becomes a truck, it doesn't fall apart and still remains a whole. And last but not the least is, again, referencing back to the Conway's law that Minette mentioned, is sometimes it's easy for teams, and especially when the project is not in the visibility line of services, it's very easy to lose sight of the user. And then teams start thinking in the engineering and solutioning mindset and make decisions based on, how they are structured. So it was important to shift the mindset and talk about who the users are, what we want to do. With this, let me just start with the first part of the framework, which says removing your blinders. And why it's important, because we saw through the first section, as well as what Minette explained, that service design is about front stage, backstage. Transformation is also not about transforming a particular piece of software. It's about organization, teams, thinking, mindset, and a lot more. So why it's important for us to know all of these layers or fabrics that exist while thinking of a transformation project is because when this transformation would hit the road or will be shipped, it's important to know what all other teams will be impacted, or teams that will be important for us to be able to make this transformation successful. Because they might not be there needed today, but they definitely are important when this goes off to the market. Service, the user experience part, infrastructure, the organization, what are some of the values, vision, etc. And most importantly, culture. What are our ways of working, people, decision making, because they can really make or break your transformation, a success or a failure. The next one is, again, coming back to the big picture and the research. I think you would have, it's no brainer that we all know why research is important and why we need to do. But I will tell you what really worked for us. We never relied on a tertiary or, secondary, tertiary, plus information. We really wanted to base our maps like ecosystem, blueprints on what we hear from user. And depending on the context, you need not have the end user as user always, but whoever is the hero of the service transformation or the project is your user, and you can keep shifting focus and context based on that. The mantra that we used is, it's very easy to get into this exercise of creating loads of blueprints, very complex, nice looking. But the mantra that me and Minette followed is, we really ask these very fundamental questions before even putting pen to paper, or rather mouse to the screen, is who is it for? Why will they use it for? And what problems will they solve? Which will then help us to define what is the level of details. We don't need 100 swim lanes. We could have just 3 swim lanes, but we know exactly what this piece of artifact is going to do. What this also did for us is it allowed teams to co-own it, because we were creating them with all of them with them. It's impossible for 1 or 2 people to know the entire mammoth of complexity in an organization, but at the same time, it allowed people to discover the blind spots and misalignments themselves. So we were not really playing this role of telling them do this, do that, but they, it's a self-realization is the best realization. Moving to the next one, again, co-creation, facilitation are always great, but building relationship goes a long, long way. It's a very effective tool for service design to navigate through this complexity and also ensure that our users are not forgotten while we make certain decisions. Like I said, it's easy to make decisions that do not involve user interest. So setting up platforms, meeting cadence with other functions have many benefits. It might seem a little tedious in the beginning, but then you will realize when all of those misalignments and blind spots start emerging, you exactly know how to solve them, with whom to talk to, and they will all jump in to solve the problem with you. These collaborations are of different nature, and one needs to really understand what the relationship is. Sometimes they're only need to know basis. Sometimes you really need to jump into a solution to solve something. And depending on the program that you're in, the dynamics between the teams, you can choose the way of interacting and the cadence. But it's important not to lose sight of all of the other teams and functions and really build that relationship right from the beginning.
So I know that we just have 1 more minute left and we still have quite a few slides to go. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. So in this slide, we wanted to point out that when you are doing your workshops, don't forget all of the adjacent processes and tools that your users or customers might need outside of your own ecosystem. For example, like if they need to communicate out, or how are they doing that? Are they using email clients, et cetera? So you need to take all of those other bits and pieces of the entire customer journey into account. So next slide, please. So when we talk about design governance, we're talking about things like, one of the things that Poorva and I did was to create service design principles. This helps you prioritize your decision making. One example is that it enables the user, that our goal is, we say this as a team, is to enable a user to fulfill their main task within one application. So sometimes as part of a transformation process, you're creating several applications. So you need to be able to state this principle so that all the different teams adhere to it. Another thing that we are working on is language style guidelines. This is not usually within or always within the scope of service design. In our case, it was, but this is very important so that it creates a unified voice across the entire ecosystem. Next slide, please. Next, we have then creating user-centric methods and metrics. So we want to really apply an evolutionary discovery-led mindset to problem solving. So this is very important so that teams break down the barriers to working together and across teams, across also different functions. The second is that we actually created a master prototype and a system, more importantly, for designers to share prototypes across all of the different teams and within teams. And this was very important so that we can have a bird's eye view over the entire program at once. And we were able to also then identify, okay, where are the gaps, where are the conflicts, and how should we best solve them? Also, this can also be a very important tool when we then go into talking about training and transitioning our users into the new ecosystem. The third here is to create user-centric OKRs and metrics. This is very important because there's a tendency to then define goals in ways that may sound like they are productive, but don't actually have an impact on the user. So we want to be able to draw them back and make sure that we can answer the question, how does this benefit, our end customers, our goal, the people that we really want to reach. So one way of doing that is to couch it in this phrase of, in order for the user to be able to do something, we want to give them this. We want to create this. So there are many ways of doing this, but this is something that's really good to keep in mind to keep the direction going in a way that's impactful. Yes, and so what are the outcomes that we're going for in this digital transformation process with service design? So we're looking at creating better communication and collaboration across teams. Service design is like a hub that connects all of the teams together in this big transformation process. And actually, I should also say, it doesn't have to be a really big transformation process. Even in small transformation processes, this is quite important because you can have lots and lots of different stakeholders, and service design needs to talk to all of them. So then we're all aligned on priorities and on user centricity. We're able to identify and resolve critical blind spots. We are able to also create cross-functional solutions. We unify, complex problems and programs, and also we create an environment of developing in clarity rather than in ambiguity. So, just to summarize again, we're bringing together, okay, what's good for the business, what are the opportunities for technology, and what is really, best for our users. So this is just a summary of the framework that we talked about earlier. Again, to have a successful digital transformation process, remove your blinders, get the big picture through research, facilitate cross-functional collaboration across teams, apply systems thinking, establish design governance, and use user-centric methods and metrics.
All right. This brings us to the last slide. And as you can see, the role of service design is never done. Service design is constantly walking. Just one thing I want to say is that this framework, like Minette mentioned, is applicable to any size and form of transformation. Also, it's agnostic to industry or which part, front stage or backstage part of the organization that's been initiated. So with that, I would like to say a big thank you, and we could open the forum for question and answers.
And thank you, Minette and Poorva. It was a really, really fascinating talk. And I saw actually a lot of also connections to the previous talk by Gabe and Rob, looking at the paperwork and the spreadsheets that people have to deal with. But what I really love about your perspective is really looking at that at scale. And you talked about systems thinking, and systems thinking not in terms of tech systems, but the interconnected web, about how different parts along the journey interact with one another, people, technology, tools, and so on. So really, really inspiring. Thank you for sharing this. And I have a question here that someone posted in our chat, which is the following. Usually the challenge I found is about time to delivery is already set up. And there was no backup time to do the research or an overview. How can you deal with these challenges?
Yeah, that was actually the case in our situation as well, and has been the case in most of the situations that I've worked in personally. As a designer, it's very rare that you come in and they say, "Oh, we, by the way, have factored in, in the calendar time for you to do research." You always have to learn how to argue for it in a way that really makes the risks and the potential gains very concrete. So, you could say, well, if we move forward without knowing what we're doing and we build the wrong thing, that would cost us 6 months and we would have to rebuild it. Just to put it very, very simply and crassly in that way, you have to actually quantify what the cost is, either in time, in people, in costs, in dollars or in euros. And you have to be really smart about how you talk about research. And sometimes talking about the risks is even more powerful when it comes to business advocacy, because many businesses are risk averse. Transformation projects, any projects are expensive. So you want to say, well, we want to save time by doing this. And research doesn't need to take a long time. It can be very quick. You can ask 3 to 5 users and you'll get 75% of the feedback that you need already. So quantify the amount of research that you can do within the amount of time that you have, argue for what the gains could be, and then also be very clear about what the risks will be.
Yeah, I love that connection back to the business part. And that also links really nicely to what Joe and Matt talked about this morning. It's not about time to making something, but it's time to value. And research really helps us to validate assumptions early and make sure that we're actually increasing our time to value by iterating quickly, putting things in front of people, rather than waiting 2 years until the transformation is complete and we say, hey, here's something. So thank you very much for sharing. Maybe I have one quick question, and we have like 1 minute. What is the right time to bring service design into a transformation?
I'll take that. Do service design, doesn't matter. Don't wait for that perfect time in the project, because there will be no perfect time. Service design always is a brownfield, as Sarah Truman called, so doesn't matter. Just have service design. That's most important.
I would say it's as early as possible in addition to that. But better late than never.
And what happens if we started and then it comes in late. What are your recommendations?
Well, ours actually did start midway into the program. We were brought in a couple of years into the program after the program had started. And the first thing that we had to do was get the landscape. We actually had to get two snapshots. One was what was there before. The other one was what is currently happening. And then the third is where do we actually want to go and how far is that gap? So, and then the other one is make as many connections as you can. If you are a service designer coming in, or if you're a stakeholder supporting your service designers, make sure that they get the connections that they need to the people they need to speak to. And that's most important.
I'm just going to add one thing, what Minette said. I think if the biggest risk of not having it early on is you might have to rethink some of your business investment decisions, because once you see something, you cannot unsee it. And service design will always show you blind spots all the time. So then it's very hard for business leaders to rethink of the decisions because it has impact on many other things.
Wonderful. Thank you, Minette. Thank you, Poorva. It was a really inspiring talk. Thank you for sharing your experiences and the story.